SEP Fanfic Readings presents Aurelian by BittyBlueEyes. Author notes. This chapter can be a bit confusing, so I thought I'd help a bit. Hermione, Harry, and Draco of the present have entered the pensive, but their characters are also in the memories. To distinguish between them, I referred to the original present-day characters as visiting. The characters that are in the memories are referred to as either the memory or the future. For example, visiting Hermione is the one that entered the pensive, and memory Hermione is the character that is in the memory, the one they are following. Chapter 6. Chasing a Memory. Hermione had hardly registered the feel of the liquid when she was pulled into the memory contained within the pensive. No sooner had her feet touched the floor than she felt herself pulled through the memory. She recognized her surroundings immediately. She was on level 2 of the Ministry of Magic, the floor where her, Ron, and Harry's offices were located. Just as quickly as she identified her location, she recognized the person she was meant to follow. She jogged to catch up so that she would no longer be pulled by the limits of the memory. What are we? Draco stuttered as he arrived and immediately started toward Hermione. We're following me, of course. Hermione pointed to the woman in front of them and answered his unfinished question. Draco did a double take as he looked from the woman beside him to the woman in front. Except for the clothing, they were an exact copy of each other. The woman in front wore a professional outfit much like the present Hermione had worn the day before. Just as we thought we would, Harry agreed with Hermione, which means they're Hermione's own memories from the future. Yes, but what are we supposed... Draco's question was cut short when they rounded the corner and stopped. Malfoy? The memory, Hermione said in surprise. The future Malfoy stopped in his tracks and stared at the woman who called his name. Can I help you with something? She asked uncertainly as she stared warily toward him. She could not be blamed for her caution, for the man looked rather jumpy. What? Malfoy asked, still surprised to see her there. She gave him a suspicious stare and repeated, I asked if you needed help with something. I'm sort of assuming you do, as you were just pacing outside my office. Memory Malfoy looked up at the door, as though surprised to see it there. He glanced again at her and back at the floor as he thought, No, I don't need anything. Wait, Memory Hermione called and reached out toward him as he turned away to walk down the hall. He only made it a few steps before a different door opened. Draco stepped back in surprise as he stood eye to eye with Harry Potter. Malfoy? Memory Harry asked in surprise. Draco turned from Harry to the woman that stood behind him. He felt trapped and it showed on his face. Did you need something, Malfoy? Memory Harry asked curiously. The internal battle that raged inside showed on his face. Malfoy, Memory Hermione said tentatively. Is something wrong? You know we... Draco turned away from Hermione quickly, stood straight, and stared hard at Harry. It seemed that Hermione's patronizing tone had made up his mind. He would not accept that kind of treatment, and so turned to the man that would never dream of taking that tone with him. I need to talk, he stated flatly. We can talk in my office, Harry offered in a businesslike voice. Hermione stood uncertainly in the hall until Harry jerked his head in invitation. She nodded and walked through. Keep up, the visiting Harry instructed as he followed her after the memories. Hermione and Draco followed after, but slightly jarred to have walked straight through the closed door that had been held open only a moment before. What's this? The interrogation room? The memory Draco asked sourly. They were obviously not what he had hoped for. Memory Harry took the same chair he'd taken the day before in his reality. Relax, it's just the best place to talk if we don't want to be overheard, Harry informed him. As he finished, Hermione set up the wards for privacy. Draco glanced at her and back at Harry. I assure you, it's not personal. I conduct more business here than I do at my desk. You can have a seat if you'd like. Hermione stood by the door and waited to see if Draco would sit. When he didn't, she decided she'd be more comfortable standing as well. So, what's going on? Harry asked with sincere concern. He had not personally spoken to Draco since he had assisted them in the few months before the war. I was attacked, the memory Draco moodily admitted through his embarrassment. By whom? Hermione asked, her own concern showing again. I don't know, he muttered his reply as he avoided both of their gazes. When neither spoke, he glanced quickly at one, then the other. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he continued. Last night, I was at a bar with some friends. We were celebrating Zabini's promotion. I left earlier than the others because I was supposed to work today. I was just walking down the street, and I don't know what happened. I woke up in my bed with a cut on my arm. He stopped again, looking at two people he'd never thought he'd go to help for. He told himself to expect them to laugh, to expect them to doubt him. At the same time, he trusted them not to do so. His trust was not misplaced. They looked at him with concern and waited for him to continue. The wall. The wall to the right of my bed was cleared. The wardrobe was knocked over and pictures were moved. There was a message. Floor to ceiling. Blood traitor. It was written in blood. Harry and Hermione were silent, both lost in their own thoughts for a moment before Harry answered the shaking man. Malfoy, I'm sorry that happened to you. Sincerely, I am, he said earnestly. But this kind of thing isn't really my department. You should really see the law enforcement squad. I know quite well what department this is, Potter, Malfoy said angrily. Only a few minutes ago he was convinced himself that Potter wouldn't patronize him, and here he was. I know what your job is, and that's why I came to you. I was under the impression that you were smarter. Malfoy, what are you saying? Harry was cut off by a small, concerned voice. You said the writing took up the whole wall, floor to ceiling? Hermione asked, a far-off look in her eyes as she thought. Draco nodded. If it's in blood, then... She looked at Harry with concern. Draco finished her thought. Something or someone had to die to write that message. He then stared pointedly at Harry. And if it was... well, I would expect that if anyone wanted to target him, it would say Death Eater, not Blood Traitor, Hermione said thoughtfully. Who would write Blood Traitor? You think it was a Death Eater? Harry asked him seriously. I want to hear you say it, Potter. Do you think it was a Death Eater? Draco insisted, his eyes hard. Harry looked at him through narrowed eyes, truly confused. You're not telling us something. Hermione's accusation was in no way harsh, and she waited patiently for his response. She was right, and he wasn't comfortable with it. He didn't want to tell them everything, not if they were just going to turn him away. But what did he have to lose? The property wards, though not what they once were, are strong. Not just anyone could have gotten in. Also, my mask. My mask was on my bed, with an X over it. Draco finished, his eyes on the floor. This isn't even 2 months from now, the visiting Hermione worried aloud. Her voice startled the two men who had forgotten her for a moment. They both looked surprised and scanned the room curiously to figure out what she knew. There was a calendar above Harry's desk. It said September 2000. I'm not dismissing this. This question doesn't get you sent to another department. I need to know. Do you know of anyone, friends or enemies, that would do this just to scare you? Harry asked seriously. I need to know honestly. No, Draco answered without hesitation. People don't like me, but I don't know anyone that would do anything like that. And I haven't seen my mask since the last battle. Harry nodded and exchanged looks with Hermione. Grab your kit, Hermione, Harry instructed. We're going to need to see your room, Malfoy. Malfoy stiffly nodded his appreciation. Potter, my mother doesn't know. No one does. Don't worry, we don't. The visiting trio was a little surprised to see the scene change as they had been so intent on the conversation that they didn't even notice Memory Hermione leave the room. What's happening? The visiting Draco asked as the world around him changed. It's a different memory, Hermione explained. But we're right back to where we started, Draco argued. Different time, Harry said. Different clothes. Draco looked around and saw the young woman. She walked down the same hall that she'd been in when they first fell into the pensive. Watch for her calendar, or any sign of the time, the visiting Hermione reminded them. The memory Hermione stopped outside her office and tried to open the door. She fumbled with several files, a couple books, and a cup of coffee. Hermione! A voice carried from the other end of the corridor. Everyone looked up and watched as Ron jogged down the silent hall to meet her. When he reached her, he took the cup of coffee off the stack and opened the door for her. Hermione, have you seen Harry? Thank you, Hermione said with immense gratitude and relief. With a great sigh, she allowed her books and files to plop onto her tidy desk. Since when do you drink coffee? Ron asked curiously as he stared into the cup. Since today, Hermione answered. It still tastes foul, but I was up all night trying to look over all of this crossover paperwork. But that's not what you're here for. What did you ask? If you've seen Harry, it's urgent, Ron repeated. He's taking an official statement from Fred and George, Hermione answered. But if it's urgent, I'm sure they won't mind. What's happened? Ron's face fell and looked at her out of the corner of his eye. She knew exactly what that look meant. He didn't want to have to say it. Somehow it was always harder for him to bring this stuff to her than to Harry. It was a little like he expected her to be weak to handle it. Or maybe he just felt bad that she had to. Tell me, Ron. It's the Parkinsons, he muttered darkly. Hermione gasped and covered her mouth. Did they find her body? Pansy? No, it started out like a regular case. We knew that magic was being used in a muggle area and we went to investigate. Well, we got there, to the house, and there were 2 dead muggles and Mr. and Mrs. Parkinson. What? Hermione asked incredulously. They were under Imperius. Had to be. Mr. Parkinson was also dead when we got there. Killed by his wife, looks like. She looked as if she was tortured first, though. She was literally out of her mind. She was twitching and just didn't seem like she was really, there. Is she okay? Hermione asked with concern. No, she was still under Imperius, it seems. We got there and she took her own life. Right in front of us, Ron mumbled. Hermione looked even more horrified, but her thoughts quickly transformed. Ron, did you search the area well, immediately? It either had to be a very strong spell, or the person casting was very close. I know, we did check, thoroughly. No such luck. This is above us, though. The use of 2 or more unforgivables is a crime scene that goes straight to the Aurors. I'll go meet with Harry for this. He'll be upset if the case goes to anyone else. He's been trying to find Pansy for... We've been trying to find Pansy for 7 months, she corrected. Why exactly? I don't know. We just need closure, I guess. Sorry. Kind of... Hermione paused. She was getting frustrated and emotionally attached to the victims. It was a big no-no to her. If she wanted to do her job well, then she had to step back and breathe. You're right, that Harry will want this. And you know he's going to be sending you over there, so you might as well get a start. I'll give you the address if you want, Ron offered. Hermione nodded. She was okay now. She was prepared. She would go and do her job. Don't forget, when you get over there, make sure you're escorted by an MLE officer, Hermione finished for him, her hand held out for the address. A seasoned officer, not just some rookie, she finished for him again. Her hand beckoned patiently for the paper in his hand. I've done this before, Ron. I know you've done this before, Hermione, Ron said seriously. And you're good at what you do. I just want you to be careful. Things aren't like they were before. Things are... I don't know. I just have a bad feeling's all. I know, and I appreciate your concern, really, she smiled warmly. The visiting Draco scowled in distaste, and then rolled his eyes as to where this informative conversation seemed to be heading. Oh, Ron, you didn't mention if Muggle police were involved. Muggle police have been sent away. They think it was a simple domestic dispute or something. This is strictly wizard business now. Were the Muggles connected to a wizard somehow, then? She asked nervously. Yeah, it's the Creevies. Dennis's parents. Ron looked down. It was always so much harder when he had to say it aloud. No, not the Creevies, visiting Harry said quietly, an ache in his chest as the thought of Dennis. He still clearly remembered the pain and grief in the boy's eyes when he had lost his brother at the last battle. 7 months, Hermione said. Her thoughts focused on what her memory self had said about Pansy. April, Draco said quietly. The calendar said April. Hermione, lost in her own thoughts, looked up at Draco in confusion, before she realized it was true. Pansy was said to be missing for 7 months, and it had been 7 months since Draco's attack. She heard herself say that she didn't believe that Pansy was alive. Could she have been the one that... Hermione didn't move until the boundaries of the next memory pulled her through. She looked up to see that the 3 of them were behind Draco and her memory self as they walked down a sidewalk in a small suburban neighborhood. A light breeze swept around them and caused small white flower petals from a nearby dogwood to flutter down like snow around them. Oh, stop complaining, Memory Hermione insisted in an annoyed voice. She closed her eyes for a moment to appreciate the soft breeze and the beautiful floral scent that accompanied it. I have to, Draco scowled at her. Yes, but now you're brooding, and that's the same thing, she said in a lofty, contemptuous voice. I know that you don't know her well, and this is weird for you. I know you don't want to be here, but she's the first person to have seen any sign at all of Dennis, and I know why we're here, Granger, Malfoy snapped. I just don't understand why I have to be here. Yes, you do. You know perfectly well that I can't go alone to any kind of interview, and Harry's got quite a bit on his plate. He would come if he could, I assure you, Hermione told him, her head held high, as it was often when she was around Malfoy. Yeah, Potter's busy, but that still doesn't explain why I'm here. Somehow you seem to have forgotten that I am not actually part of magical law enforcement, he returned, his eyes narrowed as he watched her haughty gait. You're part of our full-time investigation of Death Eater activity. Certified or not, you're part of the department now, Hermione said. I don't know that law enforcement could be drafted like that. Do you offer jobs to every bloke that gets attacked? Draco derisively asked. Hermione couldn't help but chuckle. Only insufferable, sardonic stiff-necks, it would seem. She smirked in not an unfriendly way. And you've been working with us for close to a year now, so don't pretend that you... You know, speaking of stiff necks, Draco interrupted her rant, You seem to be walking a little straight-pinned yourself. Need a help removing that stick from your—" Hermione fixed him with a hard glare, and he fell silent, a great smirk on his face. "Well, at least you're smiling," she grumbled quietly. She sighed and lifted her hand to knock on the door. Draco immediately stiffened. His smirk slipped while he schooled himself into a proud, dignified stance. Hermione squeezed her lips together to not allow a chuckle to escape. She had seen him do it 100 times, and it always amused her. He looked like stone when he stood like that. Finally, she knocked, and they waited silently for an answer. Hermione smiled broadly as the tall woman with long brown hair answered the door. "Andromeda!" Hermione smiled in greeting. "It feels like it's been ages. Thank you for—" "Granger!" The three observers were stunned by the sudden action. From where they stood, it looked like a friendly meeting. They were shocked by Draco's shout and the way he shoved Hermione roughly to the ground, but nothing surprised them more than the green light of a spell that tore through the visiting Harry's body. "Damn it, Granger!" Draco cursed at the woman who trembled on the ground next to him. "You're supposed to be the expert. What the hell are you doing? Wand at the ready. Constant vigilance. Isn't that the shite you always spout at me?" Draco's breaths were ragged, and he shook as he scolded her. Hermione looked at him, the place she had been standing, and threw the ghost-like Harry at a charm marked on the ash tree on the other side of the street. Slowly, she allowed her gaze to turn and fall on the woman who lay unconscious in the doorway, and her trembling increased. But... She was under the Imperius, Draco explained. He was certain that Hermione had already come to that conclusion, but he understood that she just needed to hear it from someone else. "Come on, get up, Granger." Hermione was surprised to see that he offered her his hand. At an incredulous look, Draco started to regret it. He helped her to her feet, and she turned to stare again at the woman she had seen many times over the last few years, the grandmother of Harry's godson. "Teddy!" Hermione shouted suddenly. It took Draco a second to realize what had happened before he chased the girl who ran full tilt through the house. The visiting Hermione looked just as stunned when visiting Harry took off after her as well. He didn't get far, though, because the scene changed again. "Damn it! No! What happened? What happened to Teddy?" Harry ranted on the visiting Hermione like it was her fault they were torn from the scene. "Easy, Potter," Draco said it in a hard but calm voice. He sounded both frightened and threatening at the same time. "Damn it!" Harry cursed again as he turned away from Hermione. He was embarrassed by his outburst, even more so from Draco being the one to call him on it, but he could still barely register those feelings over his frantic and protective feelings for Teddy. "Harry? Harry!" Harry looked up and seemed to remember himself when the form of the memory Hermione called out to him. He looked down the hall and saw her chasing after his memory self. "It sounds like thunder in these halls. What's happening? I haven't time, Hermione," Harry said hurriedly. Fear gripped her when he saw his eyes full of fierce, angry determination. It meant one of two things, death or Death Eaters. She dreaded either. "Harry!" She jogged after him. "Not now, Hermione," he scolded. "Just tell me who. Where?" She pleaded. He stopped and turned to her. It wasn't a good sign. Harry looked her in the eye and said, "The dark mark was spotted over the manor." He didn't need to specify whose manor, for she understood. "No! Malfoy?" "I don't know. That's why I have to—" "I'm going with you," Hermione declared. "Hermione, this isn't your job," Harry said as he gripped her arm to hold her back. "We said he'd be safe. We said we'd protect him. I'm coming, Harry," she said fiercely. Harry saw his own determination mirrored in her eyes, and he knew he wouldn't win. "Just wear a shield cloak and don't leave my side," Harry ordered as he shoved a cloak into her hand. The visiting Harry and Hermione exchanged looks, and made furtive glances at visiting Malfoy for his reaction. They were quite nervous to see what the memory would show next. Malfoy had to be at least doubly so. The memory Hermione raced into the next room with Harry, and before any of the visitors could follow, the world around them changed in a way that they had never experienced before. It was long and narrow, with quickly flashing colors, and as suddenly as it started, it stopped. "What was that?" the visiting Harry asked. "I think I just apparated," Hermione answered quietly. She spotted herself and Harry walking across the lawn from the gate and pointed them out to the other two visitors. They squinted into the setting sun and jogged to catch up. They had to increase their speed to almost as a run as the memory Hermione and Harry rushed into the house. Visiting Hermione kept glancing at Draco. He looked like he might be ill. "Nothing's happened yet," she reminded him. "We're here so we can prevent it." Draco did not acknowledge her in any way. He held a stoic expression as he walked behind the slowing group. There were about a dozen Aurors moving in and out and around the manor. Harry and Hermione moved over to the small group huddled around the drawing room. Robards, Harry announced his presence to his boss. Potter, good. May I check the West Wing? Has it been checked? Harry interrupted. Hermione gasped when one of the Aurors stepped to the side. There she saw a set of stockinged feet in high heels on the floor. A slow stream of blood pooled down around them. She didn't need to see any more to know who it was. I'm just going to ask you to sweep that area, Robards informed Harry. Malfoy. The visiting Hermione probed gently. Draco looked pale, his eyes unseeing as he stared at what he could see of his mother's body. He made to take a step forward, and Hermione kindly but firmly put her hand on his arm. Don't. But before they were given a choice, the visitors were pulled along and forced to chase the memory up the staircase to the West Wing. Hermione and Harry raced down the corridor, Harry using his wand to throw open each set of doors. Hermione waited anxiously at each door as Harry had to do a quick sweep of each room to make sure that no one was hiding or had been hidden there. At the fourth set of doors, Harry whisked open. They stopped. Hermione had gasped and covered her mouth as Harry stood stock still, his lips parted in shock. Visiting Harry and Hermione rushed into the room to see what their memory selves saw, and Draco followed on autopilot. There, on the hardwood floor, Draco Malfoy lay face down and unmoving with his gray eyes unseeing. Memory Hermione knelt near his head and placed her fingers on the pulse point on his neck, tears welling in her eyes. The visiting Hermione's eyes were watering in much the same way. She looked over at the living Draco, who looked both ill and numb. Oh, gods, Harry! The memory Hermione sobbed. Hermione sobbed harder. We said we'd protect him. Damn it! Why couldn't he have listened? Why couldn't he have just gone to headquarters like we asked? God damn it, Malfoy! Hermione, I know, Harry looked down and away, filled with the same guilt, pain, and anger. We were supposed to keep this from happening, Hermione repeated. We couldn't make him leave, Harry said quickly. He stopped. He knew it was not what she needed to hear right then. She wanted to blame everyone and anyone, but she would never let Harry place any blame. This isn't it. This isn't right, the visiting Hermione said seriously. You're not dead, Malfoy. You can't be. We haven't seen Aurelian yet. You can't die before that. Harry and Draco both looked at Hermione, and she could see that they were both grateful for the reminder. Whether they had forgotten, she didn't know, but they had needed the reassurance either way. Hermione, I still have to... The memory Harry started uneasily. I know, Harry, Hermione answered, her eyes still on Draco. They'll send someone to... I'll stay, Harry. You finish what you have to. Hermione looked up at him and forced a look through her tears that she hoped would reassure him that she'd be okay. Harry nodded and left the room. His look of grief still stuck in her mind. Hermione looked back down at Draco and sobbed again. She took a deep breath and tried to compose herself. Slowly, she scooted back and tried to turn his body so that he was face up. His body rolled and made a thud when it hit the hard floor. She cringed. The sound, combined with his unseeing eyes staring at the ceiling, felt like a punch to the stomach. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, she cried as she gently closed his eyes. She turned her head, not able to stand to see him like that. And that's when she saw it. Curiosity replaced some of her incredible grief when her eyes fell upon the tiny vial that rolled out of Malfoy's fingers. What is that? Visiting Harry asked. An empty vial, visiting Hermione answered, walking around the room to get a closer look, kneeling next to her memory self. I'm not sure what... Memory Hermione sniffed the bottle and snorted in distaste. She stared at it hard, her mind obviously hard at work. Suddenly she dropped the bottle and pulled Draco's head to her. What is she doing? What are you doing? Visiting Draco demanded suddenly. I'm checking. Your gums! They're purple! Visiting Hermione said excitedly. And what does that mean? Draco persisted. It means... Harry! Harry! The memory Hermione shouted as she scampered to her feet. He's alive! Harry raced into the room. Hermione, what? He's not dead. At least, I need to take him. Now! The wards are down. You can apparate. Harry hurried to cut her off. Hermione nodded. Update me! Hermione heard him but couldn't respond as she was already on the floor, her arms around Draco. She twisted where she was and the world collapsed around the visitors again. When the world reformed around them, they saw Hermione kneeling on the floor in the dimly lit foyer of Grimmauld Place. Hello? She cried desperately. Hermione? Molly called back in worry as she bustled into the room. Oh, Merlin, who? Malfoy? Can you get him to the couch? She pleaded. I need to, Molly answered quickly. Yes, of course, said Molly, pulled out her wand. Hermione took the stairs 2 at a time. The visitors were forced to follow, but their eyes stayed on the open doorway in the sitting room. Hermione stopped suddenly, halfway up the second staircase. Accio Wiggenweld! The visitors were so caught up in the frantic scene that they too had forgotten that Hermione had the ability to summon what she needed. A small blue vial flew into her hand, and before the visitors could move out of the way, the memory Hermione ran straight through them. Her feet were moving so quickly that it was a wonder she didn't fall. The visitors felt out of breath as they tried to keep up with her. Molly! She cried. I'm here! Was shouted in return. Hermione raced into the sitting room and knelt beside the velvet settee. You better hope this works, she whispered. She bit her lip and unstopped the bottle, a stray tear streaming down her heated cheeks. She let out a shaky breath and steadied her shaking hands. What is it? What is she doing? What are you doing? Harry repeated Draco's earlier questions as the 3 visitors huddled around Memory Hermione, all of them feeling desperate and anxious. It was Draught of the Living Death, Visitor Hermione answered in a whimper, hardly able to speak. The Wiggenweld potion should revive him. But why are you pouring it in his nose? Harry asked. Draco silently appreciated that Harry had asked it, for he was too sick to speak himself. He can't swallow it. If I pour it in his mouth, the saliva would just impede the absorption of the potion, but the lining of the nose is thin and delicate. It will dissolve into the bloodstream much faster, Hermione explained. And haste is what we need, because if the other potion is still being absorbed... She didn't finish her thought. She couldn't. Her brain felt numb as she watched. She knew that Draco would be okay because of what Aurelian had told her about him, but somehow the fact would not sink in. She felt as desperate as her memory self and twice as helpless. Come on, Malfoy, the memory Hermione pleaded as she pressed her fingers against his neck, prayed for his pulse to return. Please. A small, relieved chuckle escaped with her sob when she felt his slowly increasing heart rate. She turned and smiled up at Molly, who watched anxiously. Hermione opened Draco's mouth and poured a little more potion into his mouth. When he did not swallow, Hermione rubbed her finger over his tongue. He made a small gagging sound and swallowed. Good. Good, Malfoy. One more. Hermione repeated this action, giving him the last of the potion, and waited impatiently as his heart kept beating faster. Draco took a great breath, and both Hermione and Molly chuckled and sobbed together. And after another few seconds, Hermione gently called his name. Malfoy? There was no response, so she tried again, a little louder, and shook his shoulders. Malfoy, wake up. Her own heart was beating furiously as she began to panic again. Malfoy! Malfoy, wake up! She commanded, shaking him a bit harder. Malfoy, get up! The man on the sofa groaned, and slowly one of his eyes peeked open. Malfoy? She sobbed, ready to start crying again. Granger? He croaked uncertainly. Hermione buried her face in her hands and finally allowed herself to come down from the excruciating high. Granger? Malfoy asked again. You idiot! She sobbed angrily, unable to stop herself any more. She stared at him, and so fierce were her feelings that she could feel them pressing down around him. What were you thinking? Draught of living death? Gods, Malfoy! Draco was stunned by her unexpected reaction and glanced nervously at Molly. Molly smiled affectionately at Hermione and quietly left the room. Granger, I asked what you were thinking, she shouted. Do you have any idea? I thought you were dead. I thought I was going to die. That's what I thought, he said quietly, still looking a little tired. They showed up and put up wards. I couldn't apparate away. The only way I could leave was past them. It was 7-1. I was going to die. So I took the draught of the living death. And that could have killed you. If you had taken too much, if you had been stuck in either a coma or casket. I know that, but it was worth the risk. If they had found me, I would be dead, and they might have even fun torturing me first. The potion had a chance of death, but it also gave me a chance that I could make it, Draco explained. But I thought you were dead. Hermione's speech halted for a moment. Her face screwed up in grief, and the tears returned again. I thought you were dead. If I had left you to anyone else, you might have been buried alive. Which is why I was hoping you'd be the one to find me, Draco said matter-of-factly. Hermione stopped and looked at him. He tried to make it sound so simple and logical. He just didn't understand. He could see her distress, but he just couldn't understand. Never again, Malfoy. Don't you ever do anything like that to me again, she said darkly, her voice steady but severe. Granger? He felt uncomfortable, filled with guilt that he wasn't sure he should feel. Hermione grabbed his collar and stared him hard in the eye. Never again. she repeated desperately. Malfoy's eyes were locked on hers, and his guilt increased. He felt sick from it. He was sorry, sincerely sorry, and he didn't know what to say. Never again, he breathed. Hermione allowed her head to tip forward, her forehead resting on his, emotionally and physically exhausted. You have no idea what you did to me. Draco's heart raced. He still wasn't quite sure where she was, what to think of her, for her emotions seemed to be all over the place. But if it was one thing he knew, she was just too close. Hermione pressed her lips down onto his in slow, firm kiss. Draco gasped at first contact, but quickly joined her and wove his fingers into her hair. It was there, in that moment, that the fog cleared and the world finally made sense. His feelings of anger, frustration, and guilt toward this woman all rooted from the same thing. He loved her. Visiting Draco and Hermione looked up at each other. Their faces were blank and their lips parted in shock. It made no sense at all, but looking at where their memories had led, for their memory selves, it made all the sense in the world.